All right. I got a question. Have you ever been so wildly wrong about something that it broke your ability to trust yourself for a while afterwards? Yes. You know what I'm talking about? Yeah. You thought one thing was happening in some situation, and then you found out it was something else completely, right? You thought the world worked one way, and then you found out it didn't work anything like you thought it did. You thought you knew what a certain person was like, and then you found out none of the things you thought you knew about them were true. Ever been through that? Yeah, I figured. That can be a really disorienting thing, right? Because usually when we've been catastrophically wrong about something, it means that things are so much worse than we ever imagined, right? The economy's worse than we ever realized, or the environment's so much worse than we thought, or my boyfriend is so much worse than I thought. I found out he was also dating my friend and my cousin and his cousin. So I tried to talk to my therapist about it, and I found out he is also dating my therapist. Most of the time, we're used to finding out things are so much worse than we thought they were. But here's the thing. Have you ever had one of those situations where you realized you were extremely wrong about something because it turned out it was actually so much better than you thought it was? Ever been through that one? My husband actually isn't cheating on me. He's been working double shifts so we can finally make the down payment on the house that I wanted. That closed door meeting with my boss is not about me getting fired. It's about me getting promoted. That really bad diagnosis the doctors gave my baby when he was born actually didn't ruin his life. He's doing great. He's got a bright future ahead of him. Sometimes we are wrong because things are infinitely better than we ever realized they could be. Here's why we're talking about this. It's because today is what for 2,000 or so years the church calendar has called Palm Sunday. It's the Sunday before Easter. And Palm Sunday is about this. It's about how wildly wrong we were about God in the best way imaginable. Palm Sunday is about how wildly wrong we were about God in the best way imaginable. Palm Sunday is about the way that the one true God came down from heaven and lived among us and smashed all of the false pictures of God that we've built up in our heads over the course of human history, and then showed us what He is actually like. Know what I'm talking about? Because when we think of God, most of the things that immediately come to our mind are wildly wrong, aren't they? What do we usually think of? We think of a big man up in the sky, right? We literally call him the man upstairs. We think of an old guy with a beard. Probably kind of looks like Charlton Heston, right? We think of a dude just sort of zapping the people he doesn't like, rewarding the people he does like. The idea of God that sort of lives rent-free in our heads is kind of just like a cosmic gym coach who's always yelling at us because there's something wrong with us, or a cosmic taskmaster who's always just sort of counting up every mistake we've made and holding it over us. We think of like a little kid with a magnifying glass in the middle of summer, just sort of melting ants on the pavement in front of his house, but then multiplied times infinity and given a throne and a judge's gavel, right? Let's be straight with ourselves. But that vision of God doesn't actually look anything like the vision the Scriptures give of the God who actually exists. The truth we have to grasp together this morning, and that this 2,000-year-old tradition called Palm Sunday is about, is that God is like Jesus. This might sound mind-blowing or it might sound painfully obvious, but God is like Jesus. Literally. Because Jesus is God. When we look at this man, Jesus, riding into town on the first Palm Sunday, we are literally looking at the God of the universe. When we look at Jesus, we are looking at the God who created everything we see around us. When we are looking at the God who created you and me. And yet, as the God of the universe, Jesus doesn't do any of the things we naturally expect the God of the universe to do. Know what I'm talking about? I'm going to explain what I'm talking about as we work our way through the Palm Sunday story from the Gospel of Matthew. We're going to put the story up on the screen, but you're welcome to follow along in your Bibles if you have them. But beginning in Matthew 21, listen to what the Palm Sunday story says. It says, as they approached Jerusalem and came to Bethphage on the Mount of Olives, Jesus sent his 2 disciples, saying to them, go to the village ahead of you, and at once you will find a donkey tied there with her colt by her. Untie them and bring them to me. If anyone says anything to you, say that the Lord needs them, and he will send them right away. Now that's a weird thing to happen, isn't it? For just a second, forget you've ever heard this story before, and just kind of think about this as if you're hearing it for the first time. Everything Jesus just said is really weird. Go up to a random donkey in this random town and take it. Don't ask anybody. Just take it. Start going. Normally, what happens when you do something like that? Yeah, here we're in the South. You get shot, right? Everybody and their mom has a gun here, right? And if your mom has passed away, you have your gun and your mom's gun. You're like double wielding, okay? But he says you will not get shot. Nobody's going to bother you. If the owner says, hey, what are you doing with my donkey? Say, the Lord needs it. What happens when you take something that belongs to somebody else and then you say, the Lord told me to take this? Does that go well for you? What happens is they say, okay, so somebody escaped from the asylum. I'm going to call the police, and then they really do take you to the asylum. But that is not what happens here. He says, you say, the Lord needs it, and they're just going to give it to you. Why? It's because he is providentially working all these things out according to his will. What's happening here is that we are getting a glimpse of what is called, I'm going to use a big word, I apologize, the omnipotence of Jesus. That is two words smashed together. Omni, that means all. Potent, that means powerful. If you're at work and your boss says, you're kind of an impotent worker, they're saying you suck at your job. You have no power. But if you're omnipotent, it means you are what? All powerful. It means he has all power. He can do absolutely anything that is logically possible. That includes bending the will of this random donkey owner so he will give it to his disciples so he can ride it to town on its back. We see that exact same thing just a few verses later in the story. It says, a very large crowd spread their cloaks on the road, while others cut branches from the trees and spread them out on the roads. The crowds went ahead of him, and those that followed shouted, Hosanna to the Son of David. Blessed is he who comes in the name of the Lord. Hosanna in the highest heaven. Now, once again, forget that you have ever heard this story before. Everything we just read is really weird. Why is it weird? It's because in the culture of ancient Israel, the act of laying these palm branches down on the road, that's why we call it Palm Sunday, the act of spreading out your coats on top of them to make a kind of pathway for them, that meant a really specific thing. You didn't do this for your buddy. This is something you did for the king. This was a way of honoring the most powerful, most important person in all of Israel. But it actually meant more than that. Because the names that they're calling out while he rides into town over the palm branches and the spread out coats, Hosanna to the Son of David. That means something really specific. Blessed is he who comes in the name of the Lord. That means something really specific. Hosanna in the highest heaven. That means something, what am I about to say? Really specific. These names mean that this particular king is something more than just a king. It means that he's a king like David, but more than David. It means that he's a king like Solomon, but more than Solomon. That he's not just the king of Israel. He's the king of all creation. These are the names that the Old Testament prophets gave to the long-promised Savior. These are the names that the Old Testament prophets gave to God's right hand of power, to the king that God promised he would send one day to redeem humanity and restore our world. These crowds see Jesus And they recognize something our culture has forgotten. They recognize that this is the most powerful, most important person who has ever lived or will ever live. He's the king of all creation. But it's actually really weird that he's riding in on the back of a donkey, on the back of a colt. Why is that weird? It's because in ancient Israel, donkeys were associated with poverty. Donkeys were associated with the powerless, with the destitute. Donkeys were what you rode if you were too poor to own a horse. This is the all-powerful, divine King of all creation. And yet he is riding into town on the poor man's animal. Question: why would the God of the universe be riding into town on the back of the poor man's animal? It's because gods don't belong on the poor man's animal. That's why. It's because he's doing something that the scriptures call emptying himself. He's saying, I am infinitely big, but I am making myself small for you. This is a phrase we get from the book of Philippians. In Philippians, Paul uses a really weird phrase. He says that Jesus did not consider equality with God something to be used for his own advantage. Remember that sentence? And it says, he made himself nothing, taking on the very nature of a servant. This is one of those phrases that sounds insane when you say it out loud, but it's true. The God we exist to serve became like a servant toward us. Once again, forget you grew up hearing about this stuff. Forget you grew up going to Sunday school. Forget you grew up hearing these stories. Pretend you're hearing this for the first time. Let this hit you like a blank slate. The God you exist to serve emptied himself and became like a servant toward you. The first thing running through your mind ought to be, this is a weird religion. Are the other ones like this? When we look at Jesus riding into town on the back of a donkey, we are looking at the God who came down to serve his servants. He's emptying himself. He doesn't stop being God, but he gets down on the floor and starts washing the feet of his own creations. I want to camp out here for just a moment because I want to really dig into what it means to have a God who emptied himself for us. Real quick, if I can get a quick show of hands, has anybody in the room ever been betrayed by somebody who was supposed to be your friend? Anybody ever gone through that really fun experience? Okay, that is most of us. With a handful who did not raise your hands, good for you. I hope that never changes. The God who emptied himself knows what that is like. Because when we continue on in the story, here's what happens. Then one of the 12, the one called Judas Iscariot, went to the chief priests and asked, "What are you willing to give me if I deliver him over to you?" So they counted out for him 30 pieces of silver. From then on, Judas watched for an opportunity to hand him over. Now, if you're not familiar with the story, Judas is one of the 12 disciples of Jesus. These are the people that Jesus is training to introduce the world to the truth about God, to introduce the world to the message of Jesus. But they are not just his students. They're also his friends. These are the 12 best friends Jesus has in the world. That's another miracle that Jesus did that a lot of people don't talk about. He performed the miracle of having 12 close friends in his 30s. Did you have 12 close friends in your 30s? But this man, Judas, one of Jesus's closest friends in the world, is betraying him. He's handing him over to the elite rulers and priests in Jerusalem who want to kill him. Take 10 seconds. Forget you've ever heard this story and let this hit you. The all-powerful God of creation emptied himself to the point that he allowed himself to experience betrayal by his friends. Real quick, let's get another quick show of hands. Anybody here ever been abandoned by somebody you thought had your back? Anybody ever been through that really great experience? You've been abandoned by somebody you thought had your back. Ever had that experience of having a friend you thought was like ride or die? I don't know if people even say that anymore, but you thought they were with you and then they just kind of gradually drifted away from you. You don't even know why. They just kind of ghosted you after years. The God who emptied himself knows what that's like. Because when we continue on in the story, here's what happens. It says, Jesus told the rest of the disciples, "This very night you will all fall away on account of me. For it is written, I will strike the shepherd, and the sheep of the flock will be scattered. But after I have risen, I will go ahead of you into Galilee." Peter replied, "Even if all fall away on account of you, I never will." "Truly, I tell you," Jesus answered, "this very night before the rooster crows, you will disown me 3 times. Once again, forget you've ever heard this story. What's happening right here? Matthew just told us that the friends who didn't betray Jesus abandoned Jesus at his lowest moment. The all-powerful God of all creation emptied himself to the point that he literally allows his friends to cut and run when he needs them the most. Let's get another quick show of hands, real quick. Have you ever been so anxious you couldn't sleep? So anxious you couldn't eat? So anxious you couldn't pay attention to the show you're watching? Couldn't focus on your child when they were trying to tell you about their day? Couldn't stop your mind from racing 24/7 till you just kind of collapsed out of sheer exhaustion? Anybody ever been there? The God who emptied himself knows what that's like. Because when we continue on in the story, here's what happens. It says, going a little farther, he fell with his face to the ground and prayed, "My Father, if it is possible, may this cup be taken from me. Yet not as I will, but as you will." If you're not familiar with the story, here's what's happening. Jesus is about to be arrested. He's about to be dragged before the courts. He's about to be sentenced to death. He's going to be tortured. He's going to be whipped. He's going to be beaten. He's going to be crucified. That is the most excruciatingly painful form of execution ever devised in the history of humanity up to this point. The stuff the CIA is doing to torture people who post politically incorrect stuff on Facebook still doesn't even compare to crucifixion. I really thought y'all were going to find that funny. It was carefully curated by the ancient Romans to be the most humiliating, most devastating, most unbearable death possible. Jesus is staring down the barrel of that. And in the final moment before it comes, he experiences real human fear. He experiences real human anxiousness. He becomes scared. One verse before I started this quote, he says, "I am overwhelmed with sorrow to the point of death." Jesus didn't just confidently march up to the cross and say, "3 nails, please." This was the hardest decision ever made in all of human history. And he is nauseatingly anxious and afraid as he kneels down in the garden, to the point that for a moment he says, "Father, if there is another way to do this, please spare me the cross." Again, forget you've ever heard this story and let the full force of this actually hit you. The all-powerful God of all creation has experienced every last bit of the anxiousness you feel in your absolute worst moments. The God who emptied himself has felt every last ounce of the fear you have felt in your darkest moments. Quick show of hands again. Anybody in this room ever been lied about? Nobody, right? Ever had somebody drag your name through the mud? Ever had somebody just turn against you by straight up making things up about you? Like stirring up rumors about you, putting words in your mouth, turning everybody against you. The God who emptied himself for us knows what that is like. Because when we continue on in the story, here's what happens. The mob arrives. They grab hold of him. They arrest him. They drag him in front of the court in Jerusalem, and then they do this. It says the chief priests and the whole Sanhedrin were looking for false evidence against Jesus so that they could put him to death. But they did not find any, though many false witnesses came forward. Finally, 2 came forward and declared, "This fellow said, I'm able to destroy the temple of God and rebuild it in 3 days." And the high priest stood up and said to Jesus, "Are you not going to answer? What is this testimony that these men are bringing against you?" But Jesus remained silent. The high priest in charge said to him, "I charge you under oath by the living God. Tell us if you are the Messiah, the Son of God." "You have said so." Jesus replied, "But I say to all of you, from now on you will see the Son of Man sitting at the right hand of the Mighty One and coming on the clouds of heaven." And the high priest tore his clothes and said, "He has spoken blasphemy. Why do we need any more witnesses? Look, now you have heard the blasphemy. What do you think?" "He is worthy of death," they answered. Now, we just read what they call a sham trial. That's what you call a trial where the verdict has already been chosen before the trial ever takes place. There was no version of this trial where Jesus wouldn't be declared guilty, because the purpose of this trial was not to figure out whether Jesus was worthy of death. The purpose of this trial was to jerry-rig some excuse to put him to death. So they brought in false witnesses. They brought in false accusations. They brought in every lie they could conjure up. The God of all creation, the all-powerful God of the universe, emptied himself to the point that he allowed himself to go through every bit of the lies, the dragging, the false accusations you have been through. Real quick show of hands. I think one more time. Anybody here ever been mistreated by the people who were in power over you? Some of us in the room have been flat out abused by the people in power over us, exploited by the people in power over us. Some of us have been exploited by parents, or exploited by teachers, or abused by bosses, or abused by people in our government. Some of us in the room maybe even have been abused by people who were supposed to be spiritual leaders. Whatever the case, here's the unbelievable thing. The God who emptied himself knows what that is like. Because when we continue on in this story, here's what happens. It says, "Then the governor's soldiers took Jesus into the praetorium and gathered the whole company of soldiers around him. They stripped him and put a scarlet robe on him. They twisted together a crown of thorns and set it on his head. They put a staff in his right hand. They knelt in front of him and mocked him. 'Hail, King of the Jews,' they said. They spit on him and took the staff and struck him on the head again and again. After they had mocked him, they took off his robe and put his own clothes on him. Then they led him away to crucify him. What's happening here? What's happening is that we are watching the all-powerful God of the universe willingly allow himself to be abused by the small, insignificant, stupid human power brokers of this fallen world. We are watching the powerful in this world abuse the God of the universe because he has willingly made himself powerless. He's emptying himself to the point that he allows himself to be abused by the powerful in this world. And here's the unbelievably important thing for us to grasp this morning. The God who emptied himself for you is walking through all these things with you. You know what I'm talking about? The God who emptied himself for you is walking through all of these things with you. You may not have known it at the time, but this God who emptied himself to the point of betrayal by his closest friends is walking with you in every betrayal you experience. This God who emptied himself to the point of abandonment by the people who were supposed to love him is carrying you through every time you are left high and dry by somebody who was supposed to be there for you. The God who emptied himself to the point of crippling fear at the horrors of the cross is holding you steady through all the fear and the anxiousness you have felt in your darkest moments today. The God who emptied himself to the point of being dragged through the mud by false witnesses is taking you by the hand through every last one of the lies and the false accusations and the character assassinations you've been through today. This God who emptied himself to the point that he was abused by the powerful in this world is holding you up so that you will not collapse through every abuse you have experienced, every horrible thing that's been done to you. You are being walked hand in hand through every moment of your life by the God who walked through betrayal, abandonment, fear, slander, and abuse for you so that he could walk through every last one of these things with you. This is what it looks like to have a God who emptied himself for us. But here's the thing. I would be committing malpractice if I left it there. Because having a God who has emptied himself for us does not just mean that we have a God who can relate to us. It doesn't just mean we have a God who understands us. It means so much more than that. Because more than anything, it means we have a God who rescued us. Because after his sham trial, they marched him to the hill. They nailed him to the cross. And then for hours, He slowly bled to death from his wounds, slowly drowned in midair as his lungs filled with fluid, slowly overheated in slow motion, in a heart attack triggered by the sheer exhaustion of the crucifixion process. This is God on a cross. When we look at Jesus, we are looking at the crucified God. This is the most horrific injustice ever committed in all of history. The God of the universe mercilessly tortured and killed at the hands of sinful humanity. But this is also the greatest thing that has ever happened. Here's why. Listen to what Matthew says. He says, "And when Jesus had cried out again in a loud voice, he gave up his spirit. And at that moment, the curtain of the temple was torn in two from top to bottom. The earth shook. The rocks split. The tombs broke open." What did Matthew just tell us? He just told us that when the God who emptied himself for us breathed his last breath on the cross, it broke the veil between us and God forever. What do I mean when I say that? Here's what I mean when I say that. We have this problem. You and I were created by a good God, a loving God. We were also created by a righteous God, a holy God. And the reality is that being created by a good, loving, righteous, holy God is both good news and bad news for us. I probably don't have to explain why it's good news that the God that exists is righteous, but I might have to explain why it's also bad news. It's because we are not. Know what I'm talking about? The God of the universe is righteous, and we are not. Now look, compared to your sister, you're pretty good. I'm going to give you that. Compared to Jeffrey Epstein, you are doing great. I'm going to give you that one too. Compared to that guy who blew up a school bus in the 70s, compared to the Zodiac Killer, compared to Voldemort. He's not a real person. He's the bad guy from Harry Potter, but still, compared to these guys, you are actually pretty awesome. But you know, that's not actually that high of a bar. Congrats on not committing genocide. Because the measuring stick is not how much better you are than your terrible sister or the Dark Lord of the wizarding world. The measuring stick is this. Have you spent your life genuinely pursuing the Lord? Or have you spent your life rebelling against him? Have you spent your life treating him like your king, submitting to his authority? Or have you spent your life running from him? Have you spent your life treating him as your God, giving him the worship he is due? Or have you spent your life worshiping yourself, worshiping your own goals, worshiping status, worshiping money, worshiping approval, worshiping safety, worshiping power? Have you thrown yourself on his mercy as your Savior? Or have you spent your life trying to save yourself, trying to be so good you don't even need some God? Here's the truth. Whether we want to accept it or not, every single one of us has fallen short. None of us are worthy of God's presence, God's kingdom, God's love. That is the bad news of living in a world where there is a righteous God. And because every single one of us has spent our lives rebelling against the righteous God of the universe, on our own, we are condemned. That's another big theologian word, but bear with me here. On our own, we are headed for destruction, not salvation. On our own, we are headed for an eternity away from God's presence, not with God in His presence. I am not going to dive into fire and brimstone threats or rosy, sentimental promises of heaven. Hell is a real place. Heaven is a real place, but I'm not trying to win you over to heaven. I'm trying to win you to the Lord. I want to talk about that. I'm not about to do that thing where I say, hey, if you want to go to heaven, raise your hand. Okay, raise your hand. If you raised your hand, now repeat this prayer after me. Okay, congrats, you repeated the prayer after me, so now you are going to heaven. Look, nothing wrong with that. But if all you're interested in is going to heaven, I am not interested in helping you get there. I want to see you reconciled to God. I want to see you brought into a relationship with the Lord. I want to see you spend an eternity with God. That is the only thing I care about. But that means I have to tell you the bad news. On your own, you will not get there because your sin has put a wall between you and God. But here's the thing. You don't have to climb over that wall to get to Him again. He has come to you. Your sin separated you from God, but you don't have to make up for your sin to get back to Him. He emptied Himself to come to you. You built the wall that blocks you off from God's presence, but you do not have to be the one who knocks it down. He emptied Himself to knock it down because this God came to earth as a living, breathing human. And then He did what you and I and every other human in the world have failed to do. He obeyed the Lord. He actually lived a perfect life. Jesus lived the life you and I were created to live, but didn't. And then He went to the cross and He died the death that we should have died because of our sin. I love the way the old-time theologians used to put this. They said, we reap what Jesus sowed. Because Jesus reaped what our sin sowed. Jesus took the condemnation we deserved so that now we can have the salvation He deserved. He was punished on the cross for your sins so that now when you place your faith in Him, you are rewarded in eternity for His obedience. God treats you like you were righteous, just like Jesus was righteous, because He emptied Himself by taking your wrath so that you can know Him again. And I don't want you to leave this church this morning until you do. Here's what I'm doing right now. I'm inviting you to meet the God who emptied Himself for you. I'm inviting you to worship the God who emptied himself for you. I'm inviting you to give your life to the God who emptied himself for you, because he is worthy of your worship. He is worthy of your trust. He is worthy of yourself. The God who emptied himself for you is inviting you to have a relationship with him. That is what Palm Sunday is about. And if you are ready to do that, then what I want you to do is come talk to me after the service. I'm not going to push you into anything. This is a choice you have to make. But during our small group time, in just a few minutes, I'm going to be around here in the sanctuary to meet you, if we haven't already, to answer any questions that you have, to pray with you about whatever is on your heart, to talk about your next steps in your journey with the Lord. And so let's respond together in worship through song now.